Hey everyone. So you're wondering where my friend Mike Lindell is? Well, guess what? He was actually creating the My Slipper. It's like walking on clouds, right? Don't forget to use the promo code Carter, Carter, and you will receive 40% off of your My Slippers. Your whole family's going to love it. Today, I'm going to focus on Afghanistan. I've been wanting to do this for some time, and I'm so grateful that I have two really phenomenal guests on the show today. I have Simone Ledeen. She is a senior fellow with the Middle East Institute. She is also former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. I've known her for quite some time. She's a remarkable lady. You all are going to get more by me having her on this show. You're going to really understand Afghanistan, what it meant for us as a nation, why we're leaving now, what our fears are about what's going to happen when you hear Simone Ledeen talk. We also have a phenomenal guest, James Mirvaldes. He is a board member for No One Left Behind. He is a consultant for the Department of Defense and an Army Reserve non-commissioned officer. He was deployed twice in support of the global war on terrorism. And why we are here, why we are speaking to you today about this, is because all of us, even me, had great friends and enormous assistance in Afghanistan from the Afghan people, some of the Afghan people. These are people who were willing to stand up with the risk of their own life to the Taliban. These are people that exemplify the American values that we espouse most. I mean, you want to talk about people that are willing to stand for liberty and freedom? That was Shireen, my friend, who drove me and took care of me and was more like family to me and still is. When I worked in Afghanistan. What about the men and women who were trained by our special forces to stand by our troops on the front lines in their own country against terrorism and against the Taliban, and were willing to risk everything, and some of them did. We're going to talk about those stories here, and I'm going to take you to places that you probably have never been. And I'm going to describe to you what it was like for me, what it was like for my husband, who also was on the front lines in Afghanistan fighting terrorism, what that nation meant for me. You know, it's interesting, epic moments in life, right? This was an epic moment in my life, Afghanistan. It changed everything for me. And I'll explain that in a little bit. But first, today's podcast is sponsored by the Association for Mature American Citizens, AMAC. It is the only conservative alternative to AARP. Go to amac.us/Carter. That's amac.us/Carter. Don't forget that. Put CARTER. It is a great organization, and I'm so grateful to AMAC for sponsoring this podcast. Let me take you to Afghanistan, late 2007, early 2008. Our forces are on the ground battling the Taliban. We have Iranian involvement with IRGC. Basically, we knew, but it wasn't out then publicly all the time, assisting the Taliban, making bigger and better bombs, affecting what was going on inside Afghanistan. You had the Pakistan government, playing games with our U.S. forces. I was a younger reporter heading out to the war zone. And I remember how terrifying it was, the very first time. Exciting, exhilarating, yes, but terrifying. I wanted to cover our U.S. forces out on the front lines. I believed it was so imperative that we share their stories. And I didn't want to just take what the Department of Defense was saying verbatim. I didn't want to just report a press release at the Washington Times. When I took the job at the Washington Times way back when, I told them I'd do it on the contingency that I would become the Pentagon correspondent and that I would get to cover the war. And they didn't have anyone covering the war at the time. So they agreed. They brought me on board. I was covering the U.S.-Mexico border. And then I, was in Washington, D.C., getting ready for my first basically deployment as a journalist to the war zone. And believe me, I did training. I went to special classes. I was taught, emergency first aid, battlefield first aid, all of that stuff. But nothing prepared me for what I was about to experience. I remember flying in on a C-130. We were coming over the Hindu Kush, and it was in the early morning hours as the sun was coming up. And I never saw anything quite like that in my life. I was up in the front with the pilot. I could look over these jagged mountains, snow-capped mountains, and this beautiful, gorgeous terrain that the closer you got to it and the more you looked at it, the more dangerous it was. I don't know how to explain that. Maybe let me explain to you how people become their, or their nations reflect the people, right? Afghanistan is a beautiful nation, but it has struggled through decades of war. They call it the place where empires go to die, the Great British Empire, right? Nobody wins in Afghanistan. Why? Because, it's a tribal society. What are you there to win, right? There's different mindsets about what Afghanistan is and what Afghanistan could have been. The people of Afghanistan are extraordinary people. It's and I'm going to talk to Simone about this, and I'm going to talk to James about this. They're very divided into tribal groups, and it's a lot different than maybe what you experience when you see it on television. When you think of Afghanistan, I'm sure a lot of you just think, oh, it's 2,000 years in the past, and everybody's living in caves. I don't know. I hear that all the time. That's not the case. That's not the case at all. They live in culottes, these homes that, families share. They're walled in, almost like compounds with little houses in them. They're in villages. There are people from Panjshir, from the Panjshir Valley. You could go all the way up to Herat, and it's a whole new different experience. Mazar Sharif with the Hazar tribe, or into southern Afghanistan with the Pashtun. And the people are extraordinary. I always say the people, their faces. I used to take these amazing photographs when I travel with my Afghan friends, and I did quite often, believe it or not. I didn't just spend time with our troops, which I loved. And by the way, I met a lot of Afghan interpreters, and that's what we're going to be talking about here, who worked with our U.S. forces on bases beside our U.S. forces, and also a lot of Afghan villagers who worked on the bases, looking for just some more money to feed their families. And they did so at the peril of their own life, because the Taliban was always lurking. And especially in southern Afghanistan, in the Pashtun regions, where the Taliban and the Talibs had control and do have a major control of that region. Right now, President Biden is ready to pull all of our troops out by September 11th. It is something that actually President Trump agreed with. It was one thing that President Trump has said, I congratulate Biden on this decision because that's what we wanted to do. But I want you to think about why we were there. And I want you to think about those that we leave behind, right? Those that we leave behind. And this is important. A lot of the people over this longest of American wars, a lot of the Afghan citizens that supported us are now targets of the Taliban and the terrorists that are in that region still. I know President Biden has great faith that the Afghan government will not collapse when we pull out. I hear it. There's stories all over the place. President Biden's chief diplomat for peace negotiations says Afghanistan will not collapse. I do not believe that. I believe it's only a matter of time before the Taliban and the warlords and the tribal differences rip Afghanistan apart again. It is a different place. But the people of Afghanistan are extraordinary, and those that supported our nation are extraordinary people. I know this. Some of them are my friends. Some of them put their lives on the line for our U.S. soldiers every single day. Some of them lost their lives, and those of their family members supporting us in the region. We should not desert them. We should not desert them. We should not leave them behind. It's really interesting. The last week, I didn't even expect to be doing this story, right, for this podcast. But the last week, I've actually met a few Uber drivers from Afghanistan. And the reason I knew they were from Afghanistan is because their phone would ring and they would answer and they would say Bale, which is kind of like a greeting that you would hear in Afghanistan and, in South Asia. And I would say, oh, where are you from? What part of Afghanistan are you from? Oh, I'm from this region of Afghanistan. I'm from Wardak province, or I'm from Panjshir, or, and I would start talking to them, and they were so grateful to be a part of our nation. These are the few lucky ones that applied the legitimate way, that did everything we expect a great American to do, to stand up for freedom, to stand up for liberty, to stand alongside our soldiers, to be willing to give their lives, and in the end, benefited from the fact that, hey, we might not have done everything we wanted to do to succeed in Afghanistan. But guess what? We're going to bring you home with us. We're going to ensure the safety of your family, your safety from the enemies of the United States. That is the honorable American thing to do. That is the way we build allies. That is the way we build trust with people. We don't do it by walking away from people and saying, hey, good luck. Thanks a lot for helping. See you later. We don't do that. We don't build that kind of strength by behaving that way on the foreign stage. In fact, we lose a lot. Remember what was happening in Pakistan. All I have to do is tell you about the doctor that basically had helped us target Osama bin Laden. And we basically turned our back on him. And now he's sitting in a prison as a traitor in Pakistan. We don't want to be that. We want to be able to offer the Afghan people who assisted our U.S. forces on the ground and the United States fight the war on terror, target these terrorists that were meaning and still mean to harm our country. We want to offer them an opportunity for them and their children to live out their lives without the threat that the Taliban will destroy them. And that is why I am here today. I want to take you into that world. I want you to go on that ride with me, to Mazar Sharif. I want you to see what I've seen, to travel through Salong Pass with the Afghans that I trusted that are like family to me. I know it's hard to believe, huh? Some people would say, how could you trust someone, the way that you did? And I said, because when you reach a point in your life and you're working out overseas, sure, it's difficult, but there are some people that live by the same principles that you do, that would not turn their back on you, that would be there for you, even in the end, would be willing to sacrifice themselves for you. And those were the people that I knew. Those were the people that I worked with in Afghanistan. And many times they proved it to me over and over again as a journalist and as a friend. And we are still friends. And I just wish I could have gone to some of their weddings. But I get wonderful pictures and I see, their children now, and I'm in communication with them and I understand how terrified they are. One of them, in fact, wrote me just this week saying, how terrified they were and that their uncle, who was a taxi driver in Afghanistan, in Kabul, had been killed by people that opposed a government by the Taliban, is what he is saying. So this is a real threat. This is a real issue for those that helped the U.S. And that is why I have Simone Ledeen on today and James Mirvaldes today to talk to us about this, to fill us in on what's going on. And then I'll be back with so many more stories for you. I promise I'll share the story of how my husband and I met in Afghanistan and the friends that we had there and some of the really incredible journeys that I went on and things that I was able to see. Again, Simone Ledeen is a senior fellow with the Middle East Institute. Remember, she's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. Really excited to have her on the show. And James is a board member of No One Left Behind. He's a consultant for the Department of Defense, and he is here to tell us why we should care about our friends in Afghanistan and those that were willing to put everything on the line to help us fight the war on terror. I've warned you about home title theft before. I said, you better get home title lock because it's coming. Well, if you're on Facebook, that big breach is here. Facebook had 500 million accounts exposed to cyber thieves. And according to a retired FBI cybercrime expert, everything thieves need to take over as the new owner of your home was leaked. That's it. Your name, address, personal information, it's out. The thief forges your signature on a quit claim deed stating that you sold your home to him. He'll leave you in debt or even have you evicted. Do what I did and protect your home's title with Home Title Lock. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim, and then sign up for 30 free days of protection during this high-risk breach. Again, go to HometitleLock.com and use the promo code RADIO, RADIO. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code RADIO. First of all, Simone and James, thank you so much for being a part of the Sarah Carter Show. I'm so grateful to have you on today because I think this is a subject and one that is so important to me and one that I've been focused on actually since I first started reporting early on when I was at the Washington Times. So thank you so much for being with me today. And I just want to tell you how grateful I am that there are people out there fighting for our Afghan interpreters and those that helped our U.S. forces fight the war on terror.
Thank you, Sarah. Really pleased and proud to be here today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. I want to start with you, James, because we haven't had a chance to really talk. You have an organization called No One Left Behind. Can you explain to everybody what your organization does and why it's important as Americans that we support what you're doing?
Absolutely. So the organization No One Left Behind, our website is nooneleft.org. Focuses on resettling and keeping America's promise to Afghan and Iraqi combat interpreters who come here to the United States through the Special Immigrant Visa Program. So, Sarah, your opening really got me because you were talking about the principles. And I don't know if you remember this word from overseas, but we live by the code of Pashtunwali, the honor code.
Right.
That's centuries old. Where when I was in Afghanistan, the Afghans treated me like a guest because, yes, I was an American. Yes, maybe they didn't want me there, but I was still in their home. And that is something that our co-founder, Janice Shinwari, has instilled in the organization. Again, we are all volunteers, so we all have day jobs, but this mission is so important. We work hand in hand with 5 SIV ambassadors around the country who are like community liaisons. And what we do is two core missions. The first is getting everyone over here that can get through the special immigrant visa process. We'll talk about the 14 steps and how ridiculous the standard is for this to get the visa. On the second end,
how many of them, James? Really quickly, how many visas do they offer a year? Because when I first started working on this, when I first exposed the story, there were only 50 visas a year, and every single Afghan interpreter that I spoke with when I was in Afghanistan was like, "Oh, I'm going to the United States. That's why I'm working for the U.S." And I would think like, "Wow, are we really giving that many visas?" And then I found out, and I was stunned.
Yeah, Sarah, you're right. The last appropriation included 4,000 visas, but that's still at a deficit for the roughly 10,000 people without a visa that have applied for through this process. So let's back up. So Congress had appropriated roughly 10,000 visas at the end of last year, right? You had about 17,000 people in the queue. We're just talking Afghanistan. Iraq is a whole nother issue. What's happened is a lot of folks have that impression. They think America promised me that if I did my faithful and valuable service for 2 years, they will fly me to the United States. They'll get me a job, get me a house, and off I go. The reality is much, much different. And so to that point, Sarah, for a number of the families, and just so your listeners know, approximately 30,000 SIV families have successfully resettled in the United States over the last 12 years, or at least going back to 2007 when you said there were 50 visas. So this program is it's always been kind of like an afterthought where Congress scrambles at the last minute and says, oh, we have to appropriate visas. And then they put it in the National Defense Authorization Bill or the Center for Foreign Operations appropriations. It never has a home. It's literally like a last minute thing.
Right. And so now the fear is that once we pull out by September 11th, and on Simone, I'll go to you on this. Once we pull out on September 11th, we're going to be left. I mean, possibly all those that have applied for these visas are going to be left behind. And we're going to be left holding the bag here, wondering like, well, what happened to all the promises that were made by our commanders and others that we would do everything we could to get those that supported the U.S. mission in Afghanistan home?
That's right. And I would say it's not a maybe. We've got 18 weeks to go. And the number of people that, James and his organization have really helpfully kind of put together requires a massive airlift operation. And I know General McKenzie, the commander of CENTCOM, was asked this past week, have you been ordered to undertake such an airlift? And he said, no, I haven't. So it's clear that they are not planning to meet the moral obligations that we have set out for ourselves in order to save these people from what's coming.
I find it's so disheartening if we don't find a way to do this. When I think of the airlift operation, my mind goes to Vietnam, right? And I'm picturing all of the U.S. forces on the ground picking up, everybody that supported the United States and its mission in Vietnam, trying to airlift them out. Is that kind of a similar situation that they're trying to plan, or that you would want to see happen in Afghanistan, maybe in a little different way?
I would hope if such an operation ever came to be, it would be a little better organized. I mean, I know, not to date myself, but I don't remember the Vietnam War, let's say, or the airlift. But I have seen a lot of videos and documentaries over the years that are really striking, where you see people literally hanging off of helicopters, getting lifted up off the ground as the base or the embassy or wherever they are is getting swarmed. That's not an image that any of us wants in Afghanistan. And I know, having served in Afghanistan myself, I did 2 basically 1-year tours since September 11th, 2001. And I know we used to joke about, being the last person, on the last helicopter out, but it's not a joke anymore. And to be 18 weeks away from our last day on the ground, let's say, and to not have a plan in place and not having any orders to execute such a plan, we're really in a desperate, and those people, specifically those people who have saved countless American lives, are really in a desperate situation right now.
Let's talk about that. Before I get to you, James, I'm going to ask Simone quickly, because you do have a lot of experience on the ground in Afghanistan. And I've spent a lot of time there. My belief, and I'm really concerned about this, is that we only have 18 weeks. The Taliban is controlling a lot of the territory in Afghanistan right now. We know that based on intelligence that's coming through. I'm seeing stories where, the president's envoy and others are saying, the Afghan government won't collapse. I'm not too sure about that. I have a very, this is only a guess on my part, a very deep feeling here that the Taliban will try to make a move on Kabul and that the government will collapse. In that case, and if that does happen, all those people that worked with U.S. forces are going to be on that list. They will be killed by the Taliban. There is no doubt in my mind.
Sarah, I could not agree with you more. I think there are a number of troubling statements that have been coming out of the Biden administration with respect to this Afghanistan decision. I think it's complicated and emotional and sad. And I think good people can disagree on if we should pull out or not. But I would have expected a higher level of transparency from the U.S. government, especially, as you consider what our veterans and what our Gold Star families really, deserve at this point after 20 years of war. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't have a lot of confidence that the central government will be able to hold. And I think that it's irresponsible just to say as dismissively as they are saying that, yes, they will not have a problem. Of course they will have a problem. That's why they've wanted us to stay all these years. And the other thing, which I know we're not really talking about today, but I think is also important to mention, is the concept that we can conduct counterterrorism operations from outside of Afghanistan, which is
right.
what we're being told. Having worked in counterterrorism for many, many years now, Sarah, I can tell you that's not accurate. I also would point to the recent testimonies of several of our four-star generals who have said the same. So it's really disappointing after the sacrifices that so many have made, including you and your family and your husband, that we are not being given the whole story. And I'm very pessimistic about what lies ahead in Afghanistan.
Me too, Simone. And James, and when you hear that, when you hear Simone kind of lay it out like that, and you think about the possibility of what can happen, because we're still uncertain. We're guessing that things will turn for the worst, maybe. But if it does, and we haven't taken care of the interpreters and those that have worked with our U.S. forces, what will happen? What is your worst fear?
The evidence that we have coming through directly from Afghans, applicants, and people who worked with the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq, actually flooding our Facebook inbox and info at nooneleft.org account. It's bad. We've got a couple hundred requests in the last 48 hours, which is certainly a spike, citing death threats. They're worried about their families. To that point, No One Left Behind conducted research last year that was that highlighted 300 different instances of translators or their family members being killed specifically because they worked with the United States. The good news is that this research has been cited to the House Armed Services Committee in testimony, and Brown University's Cost of War project validated it. They included their own study on this SIV program. And this is probably a low estimate. We get pictures of beheadings. We get pictures of our stories about kidnapping. I mean, we are the only avenue for these allies to reach out to. We actually just got a story about how a civil affairs officer first heard about No One Left Behind in Afghanistan from the Afghans. And they explained to him, we're the only organization giving them hope because they've given up on our government. It's a lot. It's a lot. But I concur with Simone's fears that we've seen this before, what the Taliban did, certainly in the 90s. That's still relatively short time ago in Afghan history. And these families remember. They remember having being driven out in the middle of the night, beheadings, group assassinations. We are very, very concerned, and we're trying our best to work with the government to process as many visas as possible and keep our promise.
Right. And you brought up a very good point too earlier, Simone, and you as well, James, in your response to what should be done. But it's those sacrifices. Like I want you all out there to understand, when you're hearing James and Simone talk, and when you hear my stories, it's because we have been so changed as a nation because of the war in Afghanistan. My husband was blinded. You all know that, in Afghanistan, fighting the war on terror. And, he was out there with Afghan fighters, on the front lines, fighting terrorists on the front lines to ensure that they would not come here. And when Simone brought up counterterrorism, when you're working these operations and as a journalist covering these stories, you realize you have no concept of what's going on unless you're in that space. The only way to get the information necessary in order to, A, even have a chance at protecting the homeland, protecting your country from an attack by Al Qaeda, from an attack by Islamic State or another extremist organization, is to actually be in that space and to understand what is going on, to have that human intelligence. That's what the interpreters did. That's what the people on the ground in Afghanistan did for Americans too. It wasn't just translating a conversation. It was like being able to assist us assist us understand what is going on to protect our country, to protect you from ever experiencing what they are going through daily in their own country. It is a totally different world. But the thing is this, even if it's a different world, we're the same people. They have the same, I don't know, Simone, maybe you can explain this and then James, I'll go to you. But like, I think about like when I would sit down and have dinners with my friends, my Afghan friends in Afghanistan, I would go to Kabul, go to their family home or go up to Panjshir and eat at the farm and, spend time with their kids, playing in the river and just walk. I mean, it was just, I used to think of it as Shangri-La when I'd go up to the Panjshir region. It was just so exquisitely beautiful and the people were so welcoming. And then I remember the same type of the Pashtunwali experience, in the South. Can you explain that a little bit, just a little bit about that connectivity with people, how it can be so strong and what that means for us here?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, thanks for asking that. I'm kind of jealous listening to your stories because we weren't really allowed to do a lot of the things that you were able to do. So that's wonderful. My first tour in Afghanistan was in 2005, and I spent a lot of my time in the western border region with Iran, where I was working with a team of our finest members of the armed forces, focusing on a border security project. And we worked with Afghan border police, and we worked with an Afghan border police commander specifically, who was basically a legend among his men. He had one eye clouded over, which was a remnant of his days fighting in the Mujahideen, fighting the Soviets, because we, the CIA, this is all public now, gave them a lot of weapons to use. And there's one specific weapon that they gave to the Mujahideen that would unfortunately injure eyes. So there are a lot of, men of a certain age walking around with clouded over eyes. And when you see that, that they were in the Mujahideen back in the day. So this man that we worked with, the border police commander, his name was Ayub. He was one of those men. He always wore sunglasses, and he was really revered. I mean, his men had a serious hero worship, and rightly so. I mean, he was a very tough commander. There are a lot of stories that people like to tell about the Afghans kind of when they're faced with battle, they turn and run. This was not the case with them. I mean, Ayub they would stand their ground, they would fight. And for a while they won. They were cleaning up drug trafficking in that region. There were a lot of kind of nefarious things going on that he stopped. I mean, legitimately stopped. And unfortunately, because he was so successful, he was also targeted. And, we didn't have a huge force out there. We specifically trained him, equipped him. We gave him and his men, extra fuel so they could do their missions effectively. And unfortunately, because he was so successful and he wouldn't get bought off by the drug traffickers or the terrorists, he was targeted in an IED, a remote controlled IED that his vehicle drove over one day. And unfortunately, it killed him.
Just really quickly, those are the stories that I would remember, all the guys that were out there. And you're right. I don't think people really understand until we look back on this history. The Afghan people, they are fighters. They are warriors. And I remember even when some of them that I know here would see my husband and he would tell the story, about what happened. In fact, a really good Afghan friend who was wounded as well, he felt connected to my husband in the battle against the Talibs and, against Al-Qaeda, and really looked at my husband like, wow, you're a hero. You're willing to put yourself on the line. We're willing to put ourselves on the line as well.
Totally. I just wanted to add one thing, Sarah, which is that he was in charge of, training new recruits for the mission as well. And one day there was a big, what they called a riot in the training center. And he found out that it was because during the human rights session, someone said, women are equal to men, and that caused a riot. And he actually had, one day when I was in his office, we would have lunch sometimes and talk about the mission. He had them brought in, these two kind of troublemakers, in flex cuffs to see me. And he said, this is a woman who we need to help us. Like, get with the program, gentlemen. We had a translator who was, because Ayub didn't speak English, he was translating this whole thing to me. I was a little scared. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh dear, they're not happy I'm here. But he explained in a really kind of passionate and moving way how, you guys are backwards. The rest of the world doesn't think this way. She's here, to help us as a representative of the U.S. government. And you need to get with modern times.
That's an amazing story, Simone. That's an amazing story. I can understand how you would feel, like a little bit taken back, but it's so incredible because that's really the issue. When you think about it, little by little, we make a difference in the world by just being there, by your presence alone. And I'm going to go to you, James, but I gotta tell Simone this, because this is just, I guess we're sharing stories now, right? And I remember going to a village once, and I was with a Marine unit, out in Helmand province. And there was a little girl, and I was the only woman with all these Marines. And when I removed my helmet from my head, because I had a flak vest on and everything, and then I went to put my scarf over my head, this little girl fell backwards. She almost passed out. Like, she literally couldn't believe it. She was like, she thought I was going to get killed. Her father was like, she had never seen a woman walking with men like this before. So I think, little by little, we make a difference. James, what is it that you would like people to understand about? And I'm looking at your website right now, you guys. If you don't get a chance to do it while you're listening to this podcast, please go to No One Left. It's nooneleft.org, right?
That's correct. Okay. I want your audience to know a couple things. One, this experience and these stories are more common than you think. So Sarah, you are part of a pretty cool club. I don't know if you've ever talked to Pete Hegseth, but he worked hard to bring his two interpreters through the SIV program. Ambassador Nikki Haley, her husband brought over his two Afghan interpreters. And actually, a lot of people don't know this, breaking news on your show, but they are very proud. They actually hosted a family after one of the Afghan interpreter families. They brought them into the home for about 3 weeks. They don't talk about it. They don't brag about it. But because Lutheran Services had finished their 6 months of initial refugee support, and the family still needed help. So Ambassador Haley and her family brought a family into their home. I mean, that just gives you goosebumps.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. I got to get her on the show to talk about this. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to reach out to Ambassador Haley. I want you on the show to discuss that. I know she doesn't want to talk about it, but now is a good time. Now is a good time to talk about how important that is.
Yep, she mentions a little bit about this in her book, and she brought it up in her nomination hearing back in 2018. But yeah, it's incredible, just that bond and that spirit. President Trump saluted two Afghan interpreters at two different Medal of Honor ceremonies for Special Forces soldiers at the end of his administration. So it just more and more people have a tie to this that they don't realize. And for those who are overseas, Simone, myself, the millions of Americans that had a uniform on, the millions that didn't, you have a story, and it's part of our American fabric. So just wanted your audience to know this. Number two, these folks are the best examples of legal merit-based immigration. I know a lot of people are focused on what's happening at the southern border. I certainly am. For everything that's happening there, just know that you have allies, American allies, some who've been shot, blown up by IEDs, some who've saved American lives, who are trying to come here the legal right way, and they're being punished for it. They are waiting 3.5 years while they're being hunted by the Taliban. It really confuses me. So this is something we want to highlight and just showcase that, hey, we got to do the right thing by the people we promised. The immigration system is broken. For your listeners, Sarah, I equate what we're trying to deal with like a traffic jam on the Beltway, right?
Right.
All the different immigration cases, everything coming across the southern border, your political asylees, religious refugees, Syrian refugees, right, from back in the day, your SIVs.
Right.
Everything is using the same set of resources, the same assessors, the same computer systems. No, we need an HOV lane for people who are assets, like Simone was talking about, like you were talking about, human resources. We need to get them through and keep our promise as soon as possible. And the last thing I'll tell your listeners, I had a great email conversation with Speaker Gingrich. And a lot of people, there's a feeling out there like, hey, okay, we've gotten 30,000 families over. That's enough. No. Look at this long term. We've been fighting the Taliban with trillions of dollars. The Brown University Cost of War Project has done a great job looking at the amount of money spent. And I think it's a fair question for any American to look at that and say, okay, what did that get us? Because there's a lot of dead Americans, but we know the Taliban now has control over more of Afghanistan than it did in 2001. So what was the return on investment? What I'd say to those listeners is that this is a long game. All right, we've tried to defeat the Taliban with bombs and missiles. What this is making sure that we can give the American dream to our allies, have them be successful, and then return to the region with investments, ideas, standing up more girls' schools, promoting human rights. We're fighting the next generation. This is a 30, 40-year war. So, okay, the first half, it was a draw. But by standing up our allies, making sure they can make it in America, be safe, be happy, their heart is always going to be looking back to see what they can do to stabilize the region. And that's the hearts and minds that we really need to take care of.
100%. That is the HOV lane. Look, that President Biden needs to get in place right now. I absolutely believe that. You know, I spent a lot of time on the U.S.-Mexico border. The stories there are gut-wrenching. I focus on the humanitarian issues and the crisis of a failed system at the border. But when we have people who have already applied, who are already going through the checks and clearances that they need to go through, who have proven basically to our country, James and Simone, that they are worthy of being here because they believe in the same principles, the same values that make our country so great. And James, by the way, that's a really great point to say, look, this is a decades long process, maybe even another generation process. I hope not. But when we have so many people here and we expose people to our way of life here and they take that back and we work together, when we stand by our allies, they stand by us. But when we desert them, when we fail to live up to our word, we turn people against us. And it makes for a much worse situation. What can the American people do? I have two questions for both of you. One, what can Americans do to get behind this, to make things happen, to actually support no one left behind? And two, what if you had an opportunity, either of you, to sit in the Oval Office to speak with President Biden, what would you tell him that would get him to change his mind or get him to take action right away on this so that we can get some of these heroes home with our heroes?
In my opinion, I don't know that there would be a lot of value, unfortunately, in speaking to President Biden about this right now, because it's clear to me that he's made up his mind, and these are not issues that are being prioritized in any way. Even despite the excellent point you made, Sarah, that and James, specifically the propaganda opportunity this is going to be providing to our enemies and our strategic competitors. So I actually think that we might get more if we start bombarding our members of Congress to care about this.
Smart.
I think that this is why this conversation today is so important, because we want to raise awareness of the importance of this issue. It's not just like, oh yeah, ho-hum, interpreters. No, they're an important part of our fabric. We want them in this country. We want people who have contributed to America already to come and help, continue to make this country great. And especially when we're up against this big border crisis that everybody's concerned about. So I would focus primarily at this point, because of the time frame that we have, on moving members of Congress to take action. And that's, in my opinion, really what we need. But I know that James is the real expert on the nuts and bolts of how to do this. Unfortunately, the process that has been in place to now, we just don't have time to continue using that. We are talking about the requirement for a massive airlift operation at this point, and we need people to really get in gear and start. First of all, approve it, and second, move out and execute it.
Who would do that, James? Who would be the person to approve it, to execute it, and to make it happen? What do we need to do?
Well, Sarah, you saw it. General McKenzie asked for an invite to the dance. He said it last Friday. The DoD has assets. Mm-hmm. It's got capability. This is a State Department function, right? It stops with the Secretary of State. So Secretary of State answers to President Biden. Those are the two main folks running this operation at this moment. But to Simone's point, she's 100% right. We need actually our senators to really come together. We've been working very hard to make this a bipartisan effort. Senator John McCain was the one who first started this program with Senator Kennedy back in 2007 for the Iraqis. So Sarah, coming back to the beginning of the show when you said there were only 50 visas, that was that program. 2 years later, wow. 2 years later, Senator McCain created the Afghan Allies Protection Act with Senator Shaheen. Unfortunately, when Senator McCain passed, very few Republicans stood up. So we've been working really hard with Senator Ernst as a combat veteran herself, Senator Cotton, combat veteran, and Senator Graham. I can now tell you a quick story. I had the pleasure of keeping Senator Graham safe. I was his on a security detail for a very brief visit to the Justice Center in Parwan. And I know the senator, he's worked with interpreters on his multiple times overseas. So again, we really are just looking for leadership coming together, the Senate coming together, bipartisan. I know it's a hard word in this day and age, but this is one of those issues that cuts through everything. What you can do, go to nooneleft.org. We're going to have calls to action. You can see our videos. I'd also ask you to tune in CBS Thursdays, 8:30 p.m. There's a show called The United States of Al. Sarah, it's a comedy about 20 years of war and bringing over an Afghan interpreter. And I'm sure you're like, how is that even funny? Believe me, it is.
Oh, it can be funny.
it can be. The writers are from The Big Bang Theory. They work very closely with a military liaison, a gentleman who's been just such a strong advocate for SIVs all his years. His name is Chase Millsap. And I want to bring this up because Chase graduated from the Naval Academy, deployed to Iraq as a Marine officer, tried to bring over his 2 Iraqi interpreters and failed. And he's still working on that to this day. That experience wasn't enough for him. So Chase became a Green Beret and deployed several more times. In between those duties, he'd come to Capitol Hill, he'd sit with members of Congress, and everyone would say, yes, this is something we have to fix. That was years ago. He got frustrated that nothing was happening. So he said, that's it. I'm going to Hollywood. I'm going to put this issue in all of America's living rooms. And so they can't ignore it. And then he did it. So this is now the 5th week. They've got about 5 million viewers. Sarah, you're now part of the club because you have this experience with interpreters. I cried at the first episode. I laughed out loud. But I'm letting everyone know this hurt Chase very, very much. Just the trying to work through the government to get this, just do the right thing, keep the promise. I mean, he talks very bluntly about the personal struggle he had. And this show is a brave show. It takes on 20 years of war, divorce, death, alcoholism, unemployment. It's the VA. It's a big one. And the guide through all this is the Afghan interpreter. I really encourage you to take it out. So last point, Sarah, you had asked what I'd say to President Biden.
Right.
Well, so I would mention to him, I had the opportunity on my first deployment to mobilize out of Fort Bliss, Texas. And we were paired with a unit from the Delaware National Guard. It was his son, Beau Biden's unit. So I never saw, I think he was Captain Biden at that time, but the senior officers did. And that was right at the end. November 2008. So Captain Biden had to be flown back for the election. And then I think he went overseas and then had to go back for the inauguration. My point is, I have an educated guess that his son worked with interpreters in Iraq and if he were here today, I think he'd be very, very much in favor of this. So we just, I'd say, Mr. President, we have to get this right some way, somehow. And we've got 135 days.
Wow. That was really touching. I actually choked up a little bit on that because it was just, it is a bipartisan issue. This isn't about, I don't want to fight on this. This was a really special show because I believe that all of us, we've been, I think, blessed, and we've also faced our own demons, having dealt with Afghanistan. And it's also that way for the Afghan people, and all of us, every single one of us in our nation has been affected by what happened to us on September 11th. It changed all of our lives. It fundamentally changed our world forever. And it united us with people so far away. And I think we found some commonality, even with people that live so far away. And we've just got to stand by those principles. We've got to do the right thing. I am not going to miss one episode of the United States of Al ever now, because I am cannot believe I have not been watching that. All right. Too much time on Netflix, I guess. I'm going to support my Afghan friends and my military friends with the United States of Al. I'm not going to miss that. I am going to do everything I can to draw attention to this, Simone and James. I will continue to talk. All of you out there, please, please, please. NoOneLeft.org, NoOneLeft.org. Let's not forget this. Let's reach out. Senator Tom Cotton's awesome. Senator Lindsey Graham. Find anyone, any of your senators. I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican. Just call them up and say, look, we want to end this war feeling as though we did the right thing, the best that we could. That's the best way to walk away from Afghanistan, from the 20-year war. We're still going to be, I believe, connected to this region for a very long time. But let's do the right thing when we walk away from it. Simone, James, thank you so much for being a part of this show. It really touched my heart. You brought back so many memories, so many things that I'd love to have you back on the show. I'd love to bring you back and keep pushing this issue as we, in these last, 18 weeks that are left before we pull out. So anything that you need from me, just let me know.
Thank you. And Simone, thank you so much for connecting us with Sarah and all the service you provided overseas to keep our country safe. Sarah, thank you for all the work you're doing, the brave work you're doing reporting at the border. I heard your podcast with Michael Yan, so that sounds like that's going to be a fun trip. So just you stay safe. We need you. Sarah, this is one of my favorite quotes. It sounds weird, but it's one of my favorite quotes around 9/11. And it comes from Deborah Burlingame, whose brother Chick was the pilot of American Airlines Flight 77.
Yeah.
And her quote is, she said this in 2005, talking about the World Trade Center Memorial. She said, 9/11 is a story of human decency triumphing over human depravity. We are not going to leave our allies behind. That's not how we're going to close this chapter after 20 years of war. We ask everyone just to come to NoOneLeft.org and just thank everyone for their support.
100%. 100%. Thank you both for your service to our nation. Thank you for everything you're doing. And you are always welcome on this show, James and Simone. You're a friend of our nation. You're fighters, and you're the kind of people that I want to be in a foxhole with.
Same here, Sarah. Same here. Thank you for all you're doing. And thank you so much, especially today, for bringing attention to this important issue. And I really hope that your listeners have been moved by what they heard today and can help join this effort in doing the right thing and meeting our moral obligation.
That's right. That's right. And I know they will. I know we will. I'll do everything in my power to speak to the right people about this. And we're not going to forget. We're not going to forget our allies that did so much for us. Thanks so much, you guys. Afghanistan. I mean, it's 20 years of our lives focused in on that issue. I think that's why it was important that we had both Simone and James on the show. But I want you to hear, this clip. Now, this is actually me in 2011. In 2011, I can't believe how much time has gone by, talking about Afghanistan. I was on C-SPAN, and they were asking me about the drawdown that was going to take place in 2011. Listen to this. From the very first time that it was announced, that President Obama announced the drawdown, there were a lot of people frustrated by giving a date. There was also the other side that said we needed to have some kind of resolution to this, some kind of drawdown. But the drawdown date itself has been used by the Taliban, this I can tell you because I know this, as a propaganda message for recruitment. And the Taliban wants to be back in power. Mind you, they have no problem waiting us out. They are patient and they will wait us out. And unfortunately, we've seen a resurgence of Taliban that we didn't see in the early years after the invasion. We're seeing that now. So I think this is a very difficult subject, because if we draw down in July 2011, according to the people that I've spoken with, if we do not have the resources there to stop this, if we do not give General Petraeus what he needs to win, and win is a really strange word because what winning entails may not be what everyone thinks, but to dismantle the Taliban and to dismantle some of these groups so that the Afghan people themselves can get on their own feet. What we could see in Afghanistan is a resurgence of the Taliban, a new safe haven for terrorist organizations, and a problem that will come back to haunt us in the future. And that was it. That was the truth. And that's what I saw. And that's the reason why I traveled into the region, to tell the stories directly from the war zone, because there was no other way to get that information. No other way at all. That's why I'm going to the border now. I mean, this is the funniest thing that I have seen in a long time. And this is President Biden. I don't mean to be bashing on him right here. On immigration, this is him speaking to the joint session. He was at the national address, and Ted Cruz is Senator Ted Cruz of Texas is literally falling asleep as Biden is talking. Listen to this. I started.
Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it, because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. It's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it.
Ted Cruz is like, if you guys aren't watching this on YouTube, Ted Cruz literally is like, his eyes are opening wide, like they were shut, and he just can't even believe he's still there. He must have been having some kind of weird dream. Something was going on there. By the way, when you look at this video and you see the historic moment of two women in power behind the president of the United States, of Vice President Kamala Harris, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and then their faces, literally they've been vaccinated, but their faces are covered in masks, kind of like Silence of the Lambs or something back there. I don't even know what's going on, but it is so ridiculous. It is so ridiculous that is the first historic photo op, the first historic moment of two women in power in American history with their faces covered. Okay, I know it's COVID and everything, but come on. If you've had your vaccinations, the president's mask is off. You can take off your mask. Maybe they were using it because it was so boring that they would try to like hide their eyes behind their mask, like Wally was talking. I have no idea that something was going on there. I would have suggested if I was there, you know what? Optics, schmoptics. Throw away those masks. You guys have already had your vaccination. Let's move on with it. Let's get going. Stop trying to virtue signal. By the way, speaking of virtue signalers, Joy Reid, so insane. She is like bragging about being vaccinated and double masking. This is like getting crazy, folks. Listen to this.
I am among the fully vaccinated, joined Team Pfizer, and I did go jogging today in the park. This was the mask that I wore with a doctor's mask under it. And most of the people that I saw that were in the park was packed. I would say like 95% of the people still had masks on.
Why? Why do they have masks on? Even the CDC said you could take off your mask if you're outside. I don't know what they want to cover their face. Do they want to give up? They want to give up freedoms. It's like, oh, I can, this is crazy because I want you to think about this. There's like this whole group of people in the world that really desperately desire to belong to a club where their leader tells them what to do about everything. They're like, if Biden walked out and said the best way to fight COVID is that we all wear bubble suits, they would all jump into a bubble suit. If Biden came out or Dr. Fauci came out and said pink really distracts COVID, so wear bright pink outfits, they would want to wear bright pink outfits and then they would wear it every day, even when they found out that it didn't work. They would just do it. That's how easy it is. I never realized I lived really in a world of sheep until this happened. Because even now they're saying, please, you don't need to wear your mask outside. Just stop doing it. But they're like, no, I'm going to be like part of the big club of mask wearers. And we're going to virtue signal and we're going to make everybody else who doesn't wear a mask feel like a criminal. Yeah, thanks, Joy Reid, but no thanks. You obviously need to belong. You need to connect. You want to be a part of that group. You say, all these ideas about liberty and blah, 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 but really deep down inside, you just want to be like everyone else and you need a leader to tell you exactly what to do. I have no idea why. I personally like my liberty. I have had my vaccination, mask off when I'm outside. I don't run around trying to virtue signal to everybody. I still follow it if it's a private business, but that's it. I'm not sitting there putting my mask on all day long. Last but not least, and before I leave you for today, I really think it's important that we just touch on a couple of things. That John Brennan is definitely a communist. We have to bring that up because the former CIA director, published a recent opinion editorial where he tweeted out and tried to promote this truly anti-Semitic comment. And he, this is just part of the Obama administration. They are communists. They hate our allies like the state of Israel. That's really who they are. They really show you who they are every day. And this is what he said in his tweet. And this was with his New York Times opinion piece, how he said he always found it difficult to fathom how a nation of people deeply scarred by a history replete with prejudice, religious persecution, and unspeakable violence perpetrated against them would not be empathetic champions of those whose rights and freedoms are still abridged. Of course, that's his double speak for he hates Israel and he doesn't want the state of Israel to exist, which is the reason why John Kerry recently went after, we basically heard the truth that John Kerry allegedly leaked a ton of information to the Iranians about Israeli operations. The President Obama, his administration had a disdain for Israel. I think it spilled over into Biden's administration as well. And Hunter Biden is now apparently an educator. He is going to be speaking at Tulane University, which is so crazy, ridiculous. And Rudy Giuliani is, of course, being investigated for being a criminal, one of the greatest mayors of New York. So there, I have left you with something to think about in our upside down world. Thank you so much for being a part of the Sarah Carter Show. Remember, you can get all my links at sarahacarter.com. Thank you for being a part of this podcast. Here at the Sarah Carter Show, we are taking the story back. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Weber, the CEO of the Association for Mature American Citizens. It's also known as AMAC. Explain the differences. What makes AMAC superior to AARP beyond the fact that we don't agree with their leftist ideology?
What makes us so unique is that we truly do take our marching orders from our membership. Before we go out and about and advocate for any issue, we do consult with our AMAC members, and we do that through a variety of ways. But that really makes us very different, where AARP stood in support of Obamacare, even though their membership was largely against. AMAC will stand in support of our membership. In addition, Sarah, we offer benefits. We offer benefits just like the AARP. Ours are better because we offer choices. For example, you can call AMAC for your Medicare, and we're not going to do a one-size-fits-all one plan. The AARP endorses United Healthcare, whereas AMAC has its own trusted in-house licensed insurance advisors that are working for AMAC, stand for our mission of faith, family, and freedom, and then go about offering real choices. We do a lot of things like that that I think make us very different and make us, quite frankly, better.
Rebecca, thanks so much for being with me today. I'm honored to have you and AMAC as a sponsor for the Sarah Carter Show. You know, for more information, folks, visit amac.us/Carter.